of the things following on from acquisitions that we spoke about in the last episode was we spoke about all the acquisition and doing the assessment and due diligence and looking at statutory compliance and getting all the data and making some decisions upon what could or what the market could provide in that location. We spoke about options. But when do you actually commit to the purchase? Is that done at the end of the acquisition phase, or is that done in this phase, the feasibility stage?
Awesome question, right? Because when do we or when should we, right? And that's the hard part. Again, it comes back to, in the previous session, and when we're talking about acquisition, I said I don't acquire sites through real estate agents, and because they want the transaction to happen fast, and you need time to do your due diligence and spend money. So what we do, if you look at, if you think of the acquisition process as a funnel, where the bottom of the funnel is you've started your project. So when you're looking at the top of the funnel, so it's that whole sliding slopes coming down to the project. At the top, you're looking for your site. So you're canvassing, you can be sending out letters, you can be door knocking, whatever it might be, so that you can talk to landowners. And you go and talk to landowners, and as developers, we need, again, mentioned this in the site acquisition session that we did. We need time to look at a project. Now the feasibility segue for that is there's 3 different types of feasibility studies that we use. We have a high-level feasibility study, we have a static feasibility, and then we have a cash flow. Now the high-level feasibility is something that is done through assumptions. There's just assumptions about everything in it and rules of thumb. So we're not going off spending money on architects and engineers and town planners and all that sort of stuff. But we use that information to decide where we're going to develop, because fundamentally at a very high level, we're saying we know that we could potentially make money from developing our particular product in a particular location, because at a high level, the numbers stack up. And you go, okay, great, that works. When you go out and start talking to landowners, and landowners start saying to you, yeah, look, I'm interested in what you're talking about, and they want to start knowing about the financials, you would never use a high-level feasibility study to acquire a site.
Gotcha, yep.
And that's because the numbers are too rough. So you need to do a static feasibility study. So when an owner starts talking to you about, okay, look, this it's something I could certainly look at if the numbers are right, you need to be able to get an architect and a town planner really, really quickly to look at a concept design on your site to say, we could get, 6 townhouses or 4 townhouses, whatever it is, and they need to confirm to you that you can actually achieve that on that particular parcel of land.
Yeah.
Now, you do that without a survey. It's just very, very high level. So the town planner will look at the constraints and say the block is wide enough, the side setbacks, the rear setback, the front setback are all correct. This is what you need. So your building footprint is going to be this much, and then your architect has to be able to work within that and say, okay, given that footprint, we can fit, however many townhouses it might be.
Yeah.
That then feeds into your static feasibility.
Yeah.
And with the static feasibility, pardon me, it will give you the confidence around the number that you could potentially pay for the site.
Yeah,
so
gotcha.
At that point in time, you're starting to talk to the owner about what that number might be. Everything that sorry, let me try a cup of tea for a second.
That's okay.
Everything that we try and do in development is about minimising the amount of capital that we put into a project for as long as possible.
Yeah.
So when we try and acquire a site, we're using things like option agreements where we're promising to, buy the site.
And when you do an option agreement, are you saying the option is I will buy it for $1 million in 60 days, whatever it is?
So,
you have a figure on that.
Yeah, it might be worth $1 million today.
But of course, you can pull out anyway.
Well, depending on which type of option. So there are different options that we use to, to facilitate different things. But generally speaking, you're saying, look, your property's worth $1 million today. We are committing to buying your property in 2 years' time for 1.2.
Mm-hmm.
Or, we're saying, look, as long as everything goes well, in 2 years' time, we'll buy it for 1.2.
Yeah.
So you use this option agreement. You commit to that option agreement based on what your static feasibility does or says.
Yeah.
Then you sign the option agreement, but within your option agreement, you have what we call an exclusive. I don't know. I've got something going on today. An exclusive due diligence period.
Yeah.
Where you go and get a surveyor.
Yeah.
You go and check the contamination. There might be some big trees on the site, stuff like that. So you get the arborist or a flora fauna consultant, whatever it might be. All the consultants, it could be a heritage scenario as well. You might get a heritage consultant. So whoever the consultants are that you need to look at that site for you to de-risk it or to better off to understand what the risks are, and then to take your concept design to the next level and actually start drawing what the layout will be on that site to verify yet again that the architect was right with the concept. And in that phase, you are then creating your cash flow feasibility study. And the cash flow is the most detailed and the most accurate. And the whole intention of this exclusive due diligence period is for you to get your numbers right.
Gotcha.
And to know what the risks are. Now, if for example, there's contamination and you're going to shell out an extra $500,000 in remediation costs that wasn't in your feasibility, that might destroy it for you. In which case, 60 days, see ya, I'm out of here. Yes, you've lost that money that you invested to for your project, but you haven't lost money on your development. So better to lose that, and that's a lesson about development has overheads.
Yeah.
So, and those overheads have to get paid from the profit of a project that gets finished.
Yeah.
So, we don't talk about, when we talk about the profit that a project generates, that's the project generating that. That's not the business.
Yeah.
Because a business runs the development project and it's got expenses.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. I'm actually thinking now. So on that last point is, any cost you spend in the initial stages, you have to A, fund that initially, but also B, that to get to cover that cost, it's going to come out at the end. And that could be, depends on the development, it could be in 9, 10, 12 months if it's a sort of a buy it, update it and flip it. It could be 2 years, 3, it depends on that. So you've got to accept that, and unless you enjoy that feeling of money going out the door and not coming in, and there is a psychology around your ability to bear that sort of that pain. But that's something to be aware of. Because what I'm actually now thinking about, so where I live in Mount Martha, we discussed in the first episode, on my street at the top of we're on a hill, we're in the sort of quite a lot of tree area, that we've got a reserve right behind the back of the houses opposite me. Up the street, there's an empty plot with a lot of trees on that goes out into the bushland behind it, into the reserve, a big sort of tree area. We walk your dog, there's a gully down there, and it's nothing much there other than loads of trees. And then next door to me, I know it's at the weekend, the lady, she's selling her house. So that's a corner block next door to me, and it's probably I think it's probably built about the same time as ours. It's a flat roof. It needs a bit of work, and I think it's on the market for something like, I think it's actually the cheapest property I've seen in Mount Martha for quite a long time. It's about $820 to $950. But it's a corner block. It's quite a big block. So as we're talking about it there, I'm starting to, based on the first episode, and now starting to look at land slightly differently than I was before we started recording these shows. It's a corner block. in theory, I could start doing so. I could have a chat with her first of all because I know her, and have a conversation with her about why you're selling. She's been in it since the 70s, I think, or since the 80s. She's been in it a good 25, 30 years anyway. Partner died years and years ago, unfortunately, when he was quite young. So that can be developed. I could potentially look at, in theory, buying it, renovating it, and selling it. It's in a nice suburb, good location. We're close to the different reasons. It's a good location for certain people, obviously, if that suits the market. So I could do that. That could be an option. Or I could start thinking about, well, it's a corner block, so I can start looking into, can we put a couple of townhouses on it, and maybe 3 townhouses on it at a push, maybe, because it is a reasonably sized block. So I can run through the sort of acquisition that we've kind of covered on both the blocks, essentially, to try and work out, and I can speak to the arborist about the trees and know what the overlays there, and I'm guessing that's not been developed for the entire street's been developed years and years ago, so there's obviously a reason why that hasn't yet been developed. But there could be an opportunity in that, or I could look at the property next door or somewhere elsewhere. So within that, I'm now starting to look at the sort of the feasibility. So how am I now approaching the feasibility stage, and how, obviously it's an ecosystem alongside acquisition, and the next stage will be authorities. But within feasibility, what are we now starting to crunch and look at to get into the, you've got the high level, the static, and then the cash flow feasibility. So yes, let's talk about developing, my understanding in the feasibility stages.
What you just described, I've created a monster, right?
I'm starting to worry. Legitimately, I'm like, I haven't got any money, Steve. Please do not allow me to lose what little money I've got. I don't want to lose the house. But I'm also quite keen to sort of say, oh, well, actually, maybe, I don't know.
But what you just said about the corner plot, that corner block, right? I mean, in the previous session, when we were talking about site acquisition, you're talking about buying blocks of land in a land subdivision scenario, and I was going to comment back then, but I'll use the opportunity now because it's actually better. When you look at land subdivision, when I look at land subdivision, if I'm going to develop land and sell it, I will keep every corner block. I'll keep every corner block. That'll be my profit. I'll keep the corner blocks as my profit. And I will develop those as either a subdivided dual occupancy, or put townhouses, or in any form of further development. I'll put 2 houses or 3 houses, 4 houses on that corner block. So when I create the subdivision, I will purposely make sure that those blocks tick the box for every planning control for me to be able to put additional dwellings onto that lot. So I plan ahead for that. Mm-hmm. So not only have I created, so I might have bought a block of land and I've subdivided it into, 20 or 30 lots, and, that's generated profit for me. That profit means I can keep, these 4 corner lots, right? I'll get my equity back so they can go off somewhere else, but I've then got these 4 corner lots, and I can do mini projects on each one of them. Mm. So, for me, that generates another project. So the profit generates more profit. Yeah. Over time. Yeah. So, you're talking about the house on the corner. Whenever you look at a corner block, there's a couple of things that you look at. The existing house that's on it, if it's built to the front of the lot, on the narrow side, if it's built to the front, you've got a big backyard, you may be able to subdivide that backyard off and put another dwelling on. And if your planning controls allow it, you may be able to subdivide that lot to create 2 lots and to put a house with a granny flat on it. So you may be able to turn this one house on a large lot into 4 dwellings on 2 lots. And as a developer, what we do, you were giving the, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, maybe I'm thinking about doing all this. Mate, you are being a property developer. That is what property developers do. We look at opportunities and say, what can we do with it? Right? Now, in doing that, you have to know what the market needs, because there's no point doing something the market doesn't need. So You've got to have demand for what you're looking to do. So that's otherwise you'll never get your revenue. So you've got to have that demand. So you've got to look at that, and you've got to have knowledge, basic knowledge of what the minimum lot size is and what you need to do. And if you don't have that knowledge, you've got to have a town planner that you can call really quickly and say, hey, can we do this and this? And then, get an architect and be able to say, hey, if I do this on this, do you think I could?
Yeah.
That's what it is. From that perspective, once they say, yeah, we could do that, that's when you have to be able to do a high-level feasibility really quickly. And the beauty of a high-level feasibility is that you can do it quickly as long as you know the input numbers on what it is. On my Property Development Institute website, I've got a free high-level, what we call a residual land value calculator on the site, and you plug in. There's eight inputs that you have to put into it. One of them is GST. Everyone knows that it's 10%. So there's only 7 inputs that you actually need to put into it, and from that perspective, it will punch out a number for you very quickly and tell you what you could afford to pay for a site.
Yeah.
So you look at the development on that property and you go, yep, okay. If I do option A, which might be renovate and sell, I could do option B, which is cut it in half, renovate and sell the front one, build a house and sell it on the back one. You can do that. Or, cut it in half, renovate, add a granny flat and build a house with a granny flat. That might be option 3. You can do a quick feasibility on all 3 and go, yeah, I can make money out of any one of them, or it'll only make money if I do, option 3.
Yeah.
In which case you would then further explore that option.
And what's the data I input into that? That's the size of the existing lot and the existing block, is it? And the price and stuff like that. And then...
Sorry, say that again? Yes.
The inputs that I put into that calculator, so to speak, those are the size of the existing block and what I know I'm legally allowed to, in theory, build there. Yeah, is that the data I put into it?
The price you're going to pay for the land. So the current market price for the land, right? Because this calculator will tell you what you can afford to pay for it.
Yeah.
Right. So if you do the product, whatever the product is, if you developed it, the revenue, the number of properties, the construction cost. Yeah. I'm just trying to go from memory now. So the revenue, your profit margin.
Yeah.
What you want to do.
Yeah.
It'll punch out the land value. You've got to know the construction cost.
Yeah.
But then there's every other cost. And when we talk about development, a lot of people make the mistake that the construction cost is their development cost. But it's not at all, because you've got to get your architect, your engineer, your town planner, your contamination consultant. All these different consultants have to be paid, right, from a different bucket. They don't fall under the building contract. So all of your designers and your advisors come out, council fees, the application fees, contributions, because councils, need contributions when you're increasing density. Then they've got to provide more parks and all that sort of stuff. Well, that's what they tell you anyway. So you've got to pay for that. Your finance fees and charges, your interest, that's got to come out of a different bucket. So we've got this thing, when we talk about our high-level feasibility, we've got this other bucket that is called other development costs. And it's a percentage. So you need to know what that other bucket of money is. So you need those fundamental, very high-level numbers. And if when you punch in those numbers, the residual land value that pops out is higher than what you've said the current market value is, then from that perspective you go, okay, I can pay more than what the current market is, therefore I should go and talk to that owner.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's my exercise for this evening, without getting too excited.
Well, jump on the website, it's free.
Yeah, have a little look. Right. Yeah, no, that's good to know. And it's interesting because I legitimately hadn't seen it was for sale. She hasn't got a sign up, but I saw on Saturday when I was walking the dog, she's got one of those little signs open between 9. And then I spoke to my missus about it. She said, I spoke to her a couple of days ago. She said she's going to move in with this new gentleman that she's met. And I was like, oh, okay. And then thought nothing of it other than I've looked online, obviously, like we all do, because we've all got a fascination with how much things cost on our street. And I was like, oh, That's legitimately the only property in the area below $1 million. And that, because I was wondering why there's so many cars out the front of the house on Saturday, and that's why obviously it attracts people in that space. So, yeah, interesting. So that's one thing to look at. So, and broadly speaking, is there those sort of other development costs that we were talking about there? I'm not good with build. I'm better with build costs because a lot of my clients build houses and townhouses, so I kind of roughly know what you can do. So I know you can do a relatively nice duplex, broadly speaking, for $1 million, 1.2, and that'll do you a pretty nice kind of duplex potentially. Obviously, very high level data, not a lot of science to support that. So you've got that, but if let's say it's $1 million, and the other costs, is it like 10% of that, or is it always going to be about 100 grand? Usually about 50 grand, always 1.5%. Because I know consultants charge different fee, but is there a rule of thumb around the build cost across other development costs?
If you take the land value, so what you pay for the land, and add the construction cost to it.
Yep.
So you get those two inputs, put them together. You can then put another 30% on top for the other development costs.
30%. So if I'm talking, top end let's say 900, you'd sell a property for build costs, let's say 1.1, so with $2 million. So we're looking at 2.6 to cut even. Yeah.
That will be your total development cost, exclusive of GST. So this doesn't allow for GST.
Yeah.
So you're at 2.6, and then you say, okay, I want a 20% margin on top.
Yeah.
So you need another, 520?
Yeah.
520. So now you're talking about 3.12.
Yeah.
Right? And then you've got to add GST on top of that.
Yeah.
Because when you do a new residential property, so 3.12 now becomes, call it 3.5. So you've got to be able to sell the two properties for a total of 3.5 million for you to make your 20% margin.
So you're looking at a fairly healthy duplex for 1.75 essentially, there or thereabouts.
So the question is, for a build price of $600,000 per duplex, can that $600,000 in construction cost generate the 1.75 million
1.75 in the end value? Not sure.
Yeah. And welcome to property development.
Yeah.
You must be sure.
Yeah.
The revenue is the single most important thing. When you look at a feasibility study, the biggest number in your feasibility study must be revenue.
Yeah.
All right. Otherwise forget it,
Yeah.
And if you work backwards, and this is the thing about, the residual land value calculator, when you're trying to work out what can I pay for a site, you start with your revenue. So you've got to know what you're going to develop and what the revenues are going to be. And then, you've got to take off the GST. So, if your revenues, I'm going to make it really easy for me because I'm not that smart, $11 million for revenue, take off the GST, which is $1 million, you're back to 10. So your net revenue, your net realization is 10 million. If I want a 20% profit margin, it's not 20% of the 10 million. It's 20% of another number. When you add it to it, it comes up to 10 million. So you take that 10 million and you divide it by 1.2, and you keep going backwards and backwards, deducting until you get whatever's left over is what you can pay for the land.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit, some people struggle with it because you're going backwards. People go, oh, hang on, but it's 10 million and you want a 20% profit margin, that's 2 million. No, it's not.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You're starting at, if you start at $8 million of total cost and add 20% to it, it's 9.6.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not 2 million. If you take 2 million, if you say 20% of 10 million is 2 million, that's correct.
Yeah.
But your profit margin is not on the $10 million.
Yeah.
So you end up with sort of 8.1 something.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, it's just one of those little mathematic sort of trips you up scenarios that a lot of people
That's why I put it on the website, because instead of people were ringing me all the time saying, I don't get it. How does that work? Well, go to the website, plug in the numbers, it'll just punch it out for you.
Yeah. So you've got an option on it. You're running these feasibilities, and you sort of essentially deep dive, slowly but surely, stepping further and further into the feasibility.
Because it costs you a lot of money to do a cash flow, right? The due diligence that you need to do to input to a cash flow is substantial. And from that perspective, it's worth spending the time. But you have to, for you to spend your time and the money, you have to have control of that site. And an option with a exclusive due diligence period gives you the time to do it without the chance of you being gazumped.
Yeah, yeah. Else. Yeah, and so is that worthwhile? Sort of engaging. I mean, I'm all right with sums, maths. I'm decent on an Excel spreadsheet. But is that the point you should probably look into engaging with a QS, a local QS, or a quantity surveyor, or somebody to help you with these kinds of things?
So quantity surveyors are specialists in construction cost. That's their world, is construction, not development. So whilst they will be able to help you with some of the development cost scenarios, they're not across the whole thing. This is where you have to talk to a development consultant.
Yeah, okay.
If you don't know, you need to talk to somebody who does.
Yeah.
And generally, development consultants are the ones that will provide you with that information.
Yeah. So you could probably do the high-level FISO once you get to know who's who in the zoo locally and to call on the right information, the right people. But once you sort of filter that down into cash flow feasibility, you need to speak to I wouldn't back I need to speak to you or somebody like you and say, listen, Steve, this is, I'm obviously not going to hit everything sweetly here. Help me out. Where's my risk? And then your extra assessment of that. So you're going to be looking into like holding costs, construction costs, superintendents, contingency, insurance, marketing collateral. Talk through some of these other items within feasibility that. Oh my
God. Yeah. How long have you got?
Yeah, not too long.
So when you let's just say you look at property development, okay, what's involved? Where is the money got to come from, and where's it going to? So first and foremost, your revenue, if you're doing residential development, your apartments, then it's going to come from your sales.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. To achieve those sales, you need a real estate agent.
Yep.
You need marketing collateral, and you need someone to manage all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. Your first amount of costs relate to your revenue.
Yeah.
You also need lawyers to prepare contracts for the sales, for the off-the-plan selling.
Mm-hmm.
So you need legals. Money is going to disappear into GST from your revenue. So instantly, when it comes to settlement, it used to be that the developer would collect the GST and then pass it back to the government. Too many developers collected the GST and suddenly went broke.
Yeah.
And government never got their GST. So nowadays, a purchaser has to remit the GST to the government, and the developer has to tell them what that GST is.
Yeah.
So that's just straight based around your revenue. From there, you've got to do all of your development. You got your land acquisition, so you've got the land price, you've got your stamp duty on the land. There may be, you're going to have the legals attached to the acquisition. If you have acquired it with an option, so there's option fees, etc., that also attach to that. So at a point in time when you become the owner of the land, you've got the holding costs, the council rates, the water rates, insurance, those type of things.
Mm-hmm.
They're all costs. So this is all tick, 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 right? Then you've got your construction cost. You might have got some early works done, some site clearing, etc., before the builder starts. That could be in the building contract. You've got the superintendents of the building contract. That's all got to be provisioned.
The superintendents being
to supervise the builder.
Yeah.
So somebody to actually look at the progressing work and to be the administrator of the terms and conditions of the building contract.
And I guess based on the fact it's the terms and conditions of the contract, of which, if I am the developer, I have next to, in fact, less than zero understanding of what's probably in that, I'm going to need somebody that's going to understand construction contracts and how to apply those to keep the builder, as much as we love them, but keep them honest.
I mean, the superintendent, or well, we'll call it the superintendent. The superintendent who sits between the client and the builder is someone that must understand the legalities, the obligations on both parties. They act as the agent for the developer to ensure the developer is meeting their obligations under the contract. And they act as pass-through for any queries, etc., that come from the builder. And they also determine, whether the builder's entitled to additional time or additional cost variations, etc., and whether or not they achieved completion by the appropriate extended date, and things like the quality of the progressing construction.
Yeah.
They assess progress claims. Well, there's a lot in that. There's a massive amount of work.
My understanding of a superintendent is that they have to be independent. So they're appointed by the developer, but to a degree they administer that contract fairly. So whatever's in the contract, so the developer can't say, I'm not paying you for this because I've decided I can't be asked because I'm not happy with you and some convoluted reason. If it's in the contract, they administer.
Depends.
Oh, okay.
So in my consultancy business, we've acted, as the superintendent. We're a superintendent of a $100+ million contract at the moment, and in that contract, it requires us to act as an independent assessor of extension of time claims, variation claims, any assessment, progress claims. We have to act independently. But in all other facets of the contract, we are an agent of the developer.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right? So in the contract, it says that we have to act that way. In a previous contract, a number of years ago, the contract stated that we were an agent of the developer, full stop. We didn't have to act independently, assess independently. We were simply an agent of the developer. So we were the developer effectively. Notwithstanding, I still viewed that from a perspective of, I want to assess everything fairly and reasonably. So, I always do it that way regardless. So, but a contract can be written where you don't have to act fairly and reasonably, which in my mind, why any builder would ever want to sign a contract like that is beyond me. It just makes no sense.
Well, I know definitely builders do inadvertently find themselves in contracts that they wish they hadn't signed up to. I know that for sure.
So let's keep going. So that's the building component. Then you've got the consultants. So architect, structural engineer, civil engineer, electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, hydraulic engineer, vertical transport engineer, which is, your lifts and elevators and stuff. Your communications, there's a telecommunications engineer, geotechnical engineer, environmental engineer, for contamination, potentially flora consultant, fauna consultant, which is your biodiversity, potentially heritage. You need valuers, quantity surveyors, market researchers, development managers, project managers, surveyor, land surveyor, strata surveyor. Okay, my brain's run out. So you've got all of those.
But there's a reason it becomes 30% roughly of.
Well, this is why we haven't even got to the council contributions. You got council, the application fees, the fees for the final certificates, so all the fees that the authorities charge. You've got their contributions. You've got any bonds that you might have to lodge for road opening fees and things like that. There's lots of fees. But then you've got your electrical authority. Are they going to need you to upgrade any infrastructure outside of the site? I mean, we had where I live, our neighbour bought a house, demolished the house, built a new house, and to put the electricity back on in that house cost $15,000 because they had to, dig a trench 15 metres to bring additional power into the house.
Yeah.
So I charged $15,000 in fees just for that. You just go, oh, okay. But water, sewer, gas. Do you need to increase any of the infrastructure? That'll do there. Then you go into finance. Application fees for your financier. Line fees, interest. Brokerage fees if you had a broker help you. I didn't mention insurance previously. Yep. Legal fees, quantity surveyor for the bank's quantity surveyor, all those sorts of things. Electronic document management systems. We all use them now because we end up in litigation. We need to access that information. So electronic document information, accounting and bookkeeping fees. If you've got a standalone project, it might be paying for all of that. And then the big one is interest.
Yeah.
So that'll do. I think I've run out for now.
It's giving me anxiety just listening to all of those, Steve, to be honest with you. All of a sudden, me getting excited about the neighbour's house and turning it into 3 townhouses. I'm like, oh, Christ, actually.
Yeah, but this is the thing. People think there's, mate, development's easy. And it's not, because every one of those things that I've just rattled off, you've got to look at it, and I've missed a few. I forgot the building code consultant, and the DDA consultant, which is the design disability, or the accessibility consultant we call them nowadays. Sorry, I'm old. I'm still in the old days. I even forgot the town planner. So all of these things, they've all potentially got a cost attached to them. And in our exclusive due diligence period, we've got to look at all of these things and say, what do we need? Out of all that list, what do we actually need? And then how much are they going to cost for my whole project? And then once we've sort of said, okay, it's going to be this much, then we've got to look at a timeline. And this is why we call it a cash flow. It's when the cash flows through your bank account. You've got to put into a timeline when you are actually going to pay each and every one of those line items money out of the door.
Yeah.
So when are you paying those people in that timeline? So to be able to do this, you also need to be able to do a program of what's involved in your project and when you're going to do it, what has to happen first, what you have to wait for, what you can do concurrently. All those type of things have to be built in because your cash flow will be reflective of your program.
Yeah, and then circling back on that particular topic around program and cash flow. Now, there are certain stages when you're looking at the building costs. Back to my certificate 4 again. There's the different. I think when the slab's down, there's the payment that the builder needs for the slab and some of the elements of work. I think it's when the frame's up.
Yep.
There's different
milestones.
There's different sort of milestones within the project whereby the builder needs paying. So there's a big outlay there. So I suppose from within that you need a program from the builder or builders that you're choosing from for them to give you an idea of, assuming they get access to the site on 1st of April. Well, probably not April Fool's Day, another date, whatever. They're giving you an idea, right? So by then the slab should be down. So you think, right, that's going to be a cost of X amount going out to then, and then so you're looking at that, and then you're tying the actual build program into these other ticket items. I was thinking like a menu of options that you've got, and if you're looking after your risk in the most conservative or risk-free way, you're going to use all of those options, and some of those you can't avoid, but there's ones that you might want to risk and not try. You might not want to have the environment. You probably do legally, I guess, have the environmental survey done in some way, but you could probably scale back a little bit if you're cost sensitive, but in scaling back in that initial cost could ultimately trip you up in quite a big way further down the track. So that comes down to my personal position on risk and whether or not I fancy saving $900 to.
I mean, when we get to the 5th fundamental, we start talking about delivery. We'll talk about the different types of building contracts, and in Australia, 2 of the major ones are created by the Master Builders Association and the Housing Industry Association, and those 2 entities are fantastic entities for the building contractors. So the contracts that they create are one-sided.
Yeah.
And as a property owner, you have to be very, very aware that if you sign that document, that you basically have no rights. So, you want to be really careful with how you deal with that. And an example is a friend of mine did a second story extension on his property, went out to tender, couldn't find any builder that was anywhere near the price that he needed. Then he found one that could do it for, very close to what his budget was. And, the builder gave him this Master Builders Association contract. And my friend rang me and said, can you have a look at it for me? And I've gone, oh, I don't like the idea of this. I looked at it, one-sided contract, and I said, look, if you sign this, these are your big ticket risks. And he said, okay. I said, you're going to have to try and negotiate with him to, perhaps get a different contract. And he said, he went back to the builder, and the builder said, hey, I'm not a lawyer. It's the Builders Association, right? They told me this is the contract I should use. That's what I want to use. And I said, okay, well, in that contract, it has provision for special conditions. What we'll do is we'll put a few handwritten special conditions in there, which will supersede the general conditions, and this will give you a bit of protection, right? So we did that. Builder was okay with that because it was his contract. The special conditions protected my friend from the major issues, and they ended up not having a problem throughout the build. But if they had a problem, at least my friend had a little bit of protection. So, you've got to be aware, because builders are they're your, I've previously said revenue is your biggest number in a feasibility. Construction cost is generally your biggest cost in your feasibility. So when we talk about risk, that the builder and the building contract are your biggest, so why would you just sign a contract that doesn't give you any form of protection against the risk of the builder taking too long, the builder, coming to you trying to chase you for variations, the builder, demanding payment for certain things. It just makes no sense. So
Yeah, and now you've said that, and I hadn't even I've heard of obviously I've had teams of recruiters, and I've recruited sometimes in the residential building sector, and certainly some of the consultants that I've recruited within my teams have recruited in that space, and they often talk about you've got to have experience with a HIA contract or the master builders contracts. But I hadn't actually twigged that of course it's going to be one-sided, because they're representing the builders, and that's why they're paying a subscription to these organisations. So I'm not critical of that, but it makes sense. And then, of course, recently we've seen lots of builders go to the wall in the last sort of 2 or 3 years, or post-COVID, and there's a lot of talk about, well, how do we protect, and rightly so, how do we protect the people buying those houses that have paid to have, well, they've started the process of building that house and land package, and now all of a sudden the builder's gone broke, or they're terrible, and they've slipped off, and they're like, and that's because of this, there's obviously they're applying in a large amount of cases these contracts that there's risk in that people are just oblivious to, because you think, oh, that's just what I have to do to buy a house. It's just you don't think to have it assessed, but I hadn't even thought about that risk.
You mentioned these milestone payments, when the slab's down, when the frame's up, etc. One of the things about those, what we call milestone payment schedules, is that you have no idea whether or not the amount of money that they've claimed is reflective of the work that they've done. Because the contract just says, when I've done this, you give me this much. And generally speaking, from my experience, the milestone payment, that first milestone payment when the slab goes down, is double what it should be. And effectively, the builder then has your cash to use to get to the next stage before they claim the next stage. So they're always in front and you're always behind. Whereas in the larger scale, more commercial building contracts, the builder has to do a month's work before they can claim, and they can only claim for the work that they've done. And that work is either valued by the superintendent or a quantity surveyor.
I got you. I've seen there.
We, in the larger scale work, we're protected from a builder going broke, because these always got to do a month's work before it can get paid.
Yeah, so the
Now,
subbies are on the hook for that falling over, whereas
yeah,
in the
I mean, it
residential
doesn't mean
space.
that the builders paid their subcontractors,
Yeah,
but it means that, you know, we're never going to pay them, the builder, for work that they haven't done. Whereas these milestone payments are all about the builder getting paid in advance for the work that they haven't done yet.
yeah,
And this is where a lot of the builders, through COVID, where construction prices went through the roof, they were getting all these advance payments and then going broke after they poured the slab, they get the advance, the milestone payment, right? And then they go broke. The homeowner goes, okay, another builder has to finish the build. Their building contract, just to make numbers easy, let's say it was $1 million to build this house and they paid $300,000 for that first milestone. The next builder comes along and says it's $1.2 million to finish the house.
yeah,
And they go,
yeah,
hang on a minute, I've already paid 300 grand
yeah.
for the slab. And the new builder says, yeah, but it's only worth 100, not our fault. So your problem, you've paid too much. And then you talk about the home warranty, compensation fund for when builders go broke. It never covers the loss. It's never enough to cover the loss. So whilst it's an insurance of the last degree, it's actually our obligation to make sure that the builder, or to make sure it's best to the best of our ability, to ensure that builder is actually viable. So one of the things that I do is, if I'm going to put anything out to tender, I will ask the builder to provide a copy of a letter from their accountant confirming that the company is financially viable. And then if they're successful, before we sign the contract with them, we want our accountants to see their last 3 years of their books to see that they've been profitable.
And are they sensitive to that data and information?
Oh, exceptionally.
Because you'll see the warts and all story about how
Yeah.
bad
See,
things are.
we've seen good stories and bad stories, and one of the things that you have to do is, one of the things that you need to consider is that builders are not like retailers or, Blue Scope Steel or, Boral Building Products. They don't make the big profits that everyone thinks that they make. And private builders make very small profits, but they pay themselves good salaries. So when I look at the books for a builder, I want to know that they're making 1 or 2% profit. It doesn't have to be more than that. It'd be great if it was more than that, but 1 or 2% profit. But what I do is I look at their salary and wages bill for the number of people that they've got in their company.
Yeah.
I look at that, and if that's pretty big, then I know they're paying the directors, the owners of the business, are taking the money out in salary and wages as opposed to profit.
So they've kind of got their piece of the pie, so to speak.
Yeah, so
they're
it's
paid, their mortgage is
anyway.
paid.
Yeah, so you have to have a basic understanding of how builders operate. The other thing that people might choose to do is get a credit check done. You can get a credit check for a reasonable fee to get it done. Again, I don't want to promote any particular brand, but there's lots of companies that do it, and that will tell you whether or not the directors have been directors of previous companies. It'll tell you whether they've been a director of a company that's gone broke or gone into liquidation. It'll tell you whether that company has been in any litigation, and that sets the scene for who you're dealing with. It'll also tell you whether or not any subbies have lodged complaints about 30 days, 60 days, 120 days payments overdue. Because again, the more overdue payments that there are reported, the more you've got to worry, because obviously the builder can't afford to pay them. So those are the sorts of things. They're all red flags. So, lots of these creditor sort of watching companies, they will give you a sort of like the bushfire signs, green to red.
Yeah.
So they'll give you a rating somewhere along that that color code to say whether or not they think that building company is a high risk, a low risk, a medium risk. They'll rate them compared to every other business that they rate. So they'll be rated in that regard. So that can give you an understanding. So it's up to you. Just because somebody seems like a really nice guy or woman, doesn't mean that their business is viable.
Yeah, yeah.
And the problem that we have, we can do all our checks and, make sure everything looks good. When they start the build for you, you never know what's going to happen with one of their other clients. They might get in a dispute with another client while they're doing your project. That could be enough to send them broke.
And what about insurance? Their insurance is it 10 or 15 grand if you're doing works over that amount? Somebody has the builder's insurance or something like that. But that, I'm assuming that doesn't. If you're spending 600 grand to build a building, their insurance probably is not going to cover them entirely if they go under, and it probably doesn't protect me that much anyway. So
that home warranty, the compensation fund. So it's called different things in different states. But the compensation fund, if a builder does go broke, it charges a premium at the beginning of the project. And, one of the things that you will end up paying that premium. I always say to my clients and myself, I want to see the receipt for that policy. I don't want to see the invoice. I want to see the receipt that they've paid it, and then I'll pay it.
Yeah.
Or I'll pay it direct, because it is not uncommon, and this was found in Victoria, post all the home builders going broke down there, that when you had the spate of them, that a lot of them had taken the premium but not paid the premium.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah, they're cash flowing themselves and protecting their bit. As everybody's essentially within all of this ecosystem of trying to get a development going, you've got all the consultants, significantly more than I thought, all the insurances, all the costs around that. Each of those organisations and people, if we judge them face to face on their merits, they're all trustworthy, they're doing everything exactly right. But realistically, in the real world, people make mistakes. Overtly, they choose to make or avoid a cost. You're cash flowing it, so you've just got to assume that it depends on how well you know and how well you trust and how many times you've done a business transaction with these people. But you've just got to be very sensitive to the fact that somebody on their side, particularly as we're dealing in probably the lower end of the market, we're not dealing with the top end, very elite operators in all their industries. Not to say they're unprofessional, but that there's potentially risks and banana skins in there that if you're oblivious to it, you could just inadvertently walk into, well, where's the pain in development comes in your pocket, in your wallet, in your cash flow. So don't expect to, if you miss one of these, it can turn out to be basically a big fall any step of the way. You could fall over and break a hip in every little banana skin that's there, and there's lots of them.
Choose the wrong builder, you are in all sorts of trouble for a very long period of time.
Yeah, interesting.
That is an absolute given. On the larger sort of projects where you're borrowing a fair bit of money, the lender will require what we call a tripartite agreement, and that is when you look at the building contract is between the developer and the builder. When the lender comes along, the lender might go, you know what? I'm not a party to the building contract, but I'm putting forward more money than what the developer is. So I want to have some sort of control over what's going on, because if the developer tells the builder to do a heap of variation work and I don't know about it, if I'm the lender, they could increase the construction costs substantially, and the developer may not have the equity to pay for those variations, because I'm not paying for them. Because I'm the lender, I've already given them a limit. So, and again, just to make maths really easy, let's say the building contract was $10 million, the lender was lending $6 million. If the builder gave the developer, $1 million worth of variations and the developer was okay with it, so the building contract's now 11, the lender's only going to pay 6, all right? So the developer was going to put 4 in. Now the developer has to put 5, but he's only got 4. Where's that other $1 million coming from?
Yeah.
So what will happen is the building will get to a certain stage and then stop. Now, that puts the lender's money at risk. So the lender says, to stop all that, we'll have this tripartite agreement between the three of us, and both the developer and the builder are going to commit legally to the lender that they will not undertake any variation work without getting the lender's approval unless it's valued below, say $20,000.
Yeah.
Right. But the variation, if it's below $20,000, doesn't have to be approved by the lender. But if the aggregate sum of all of the variations exceeds 100,000, then it has to get the lender's approval, no matter what the value. Yeah. So they give them $100,000 just for stuff ups that might have happened in the just little things. But anything in excess of that, the lender has the right to say no.
Yeah, which I'm assuming slows things down as well, because that's got to go off to the lender and Danny chasing this.
It does, but it's better than the project stopping.
Yeah, for sure.
Because what the lender will do is say to the developer, look, where are you going to get the money from? So what will happen is the lender will say, look, we're only putting the $6 million in. So what we're going to do, if you've approved, $250,000 worth of variations, you put the extra $250,000 in before we lend another cent. So it forces the developer to top up their equity that they've got in the deal to cover that variation. So that's how a lender protects itself. So if you're the developer and you've maxed out and put all your eggs in one basket, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. So it's a
balancing act as to whether or not,
it's a massive game. But and this is why it's important to have someone like me, a development consultant that you can call in your first project to actually say, look, what should we do here? What should we do here? What do we do with this? How do we do this? What are we got to be careful of? Because when you're a new player, all this sort of stuff, you go, tripartite agreement, what are you talking about? What's that?
Yeah.
And you don't expect it. Well, suddenly you got 3 months down the track, you've just spent another $20,000 on legal fees, so you've lost 3 months, you spent 20 grand on legal fees, and now you're wearing handcuffs, you're handcuffed to the lender. So all those type of things are relevant, and their costs and inputs, coming back to what this session is about, which is feasibility. It all impacts on your feasibility.
It's interesting because in the previous episode we talked about acquisition. I got quite excited. It's probably at the start of this conversation, I think about the plot of land up the street or the neighbours next door. So in that sort of high level feasibility, I'm getting a bit excited. And then as we've gone through kind of static and into cash flow feasibility, I'm like, whoa, I'm out of it. This is
there's a lot involved, and that's the thing. If there is too much involved for someone, don't do it.
Yeah.
And that's why I said it's time, because not only have we got all this massive list of things, right? That first and foremost, you need to know what they are. Secondly, you need to know how much they're going to be. So you've got to find out where all those numbers come from.
Yeah.
So how do you know what the architect's going to charge? How do you know what the town planner's going to charge? How do you know what the building code consultant's going to cost?
Yeah. And I'm guessing in theory, most people probably go with, I need to get 2 or 3 quotes, I need to speak to 3 architects, 3 town planners, 3 this, or 2. So particularly for the first 1, 2 or 3 projects, you've got way more to refine your search and who you're turning to. You've got to...
But to make it interesting is you haven't got time. You've only got 60 days to do this. And you can't get quotes for everything in 60 days. So you've got to use best endeavours, and if you don't know, you've got to plug a number in, and that's where it gets scary.
Yeah.
You've got to just throw a number in there and go, geez, I hope that's right.
Yeah.
And hope you put it into the right month of your cash flow.
Yeah.
Say, okay, it will work. All right. So that's where it gets scary. And this is where I said property development takes time. The site acquisition part, if you get it right, if you do all this hard work up front, you're not going to be chasing your tail all the way through your project. Because if you acquire a site without doing your cash flow feasibility properly, and you acquire the right site for the wrong price, from day one, you are in trouble.
Yeah.
All right. And then you're stuck with this thing for 2-3 years. So yeah, you really do have to have the can-do attitude and the willingness to really push through the mundane parts of it, which is the administration, which is creating the feasibility. Because a lot of people just go too hard.
And I suppose a lot of people are attracted to the perception of making the big, selling it, the excitement of the marketing, the sale. Are we going to get to auction? Are we going to get the price? That's the fun stuff, which could have the big payday. But the mundane stuff, as you say, the admin, the churn, the unfun stuff.
Yep.
Well, I can only imagine now getting to the stage where you're about to sell or settle on a process. How exciting that must be when finally get all that sort of payback. There must be a beautiful relief having gone through even a good project, but let alone a poor performing project for a couple of years.
Yep.
I can imagine now. What...
Make a note when we get to the episode about revenue. Right, we'll talk about pocketing the cash. Right?
Yeah.
And our biggest risk is settlement risk, is actually getting the money in the pocket at the end of the day. And that is the biggest risk for us in development, because if the money doesn't come in, what are you going to do?
Yeah, panic. Well, that's a couple of episodes away. Next is authorities. So we'll cover that in the next session. Anything? I think we've gone into feasibility quite a lot of detail there. Anything else that we haven't touched upon that you can think of instantly, or we can cover that?
If you want to keep going for another 16, 17 hours, right, we can keep talking about feasibility. Right?
But this is a significant element of the acquisition's important. I mean, are these 5 elements all equal in?
They all interrelate. You cannot do one without the other. They all feed into each other. You can't acquire a site unless you do a feasibility. You can't do a feasibility unless you know what the product is and what all your costs and revenues are, which goes back to revenue. You also have to be able to schedule your time frame, and authority approvals. What approvals do you need? When do you need them? Is there a cost attached to them? That's all feeds into your feasibility. How are you going to deliver your project? That's your consultants and your building contract. Different building contracts relate to the built form, take different time frames, and that affects your feasibility. So they're all interrelated, and you can't look at one in isolation. You can. I do have a feasibility workshop where we drill into what the things are in the feasibility, and I try to isolate it as much as I can, but you can't. There are so many other things that input into it, but I sort of brush the revenue side. I won't talk about what the product is, but I say you have to know what the product is for your revenues, because it also affects your construction cost, because you've got to know what you're going to build. So all those things, the type of building contract, I don't talk about it in the feasibility workshop, but you have to understand that it does input. But we just, look at that. I've just recently done a site acquisition workshop where we've just focused on, that whole process. What actually happens when you go door knocking? We didn't touch on that in the previous episode, but what do people say? How do you interact with people? Because that's far too detailed for what we were talking about. We're just talking an overview. So yeah, everything is interrelated. They are interrelated, but again, as I said right in the intro, I think it was, we were talking about this, where you've got to break it down into 5 things that people can understand. And then if people have more interest, then we can drill in, and then you drill in further and further and further. So at this point in time, we'll keep it pretty high level, but if people want to drill in, there's availability to do that.
Perfect. Well, so we'll pull a close to the feasibility episode, and see you and everybody else in the next episode on authorities.
Looking forward to that. Everybody loves the authorities, don't they?
See you shortly.